What is routing in Express? Let's quickly understand with the help of a diagram. We already know we have a front end which can be in Angular, React, Vue, or etc. Right? And then we have a REST API, which is in our case is in Express and Node. Now the HTTP request will come from the front end, and inside the REST API it will first hit the middleware, right? Now suppose our application is an e-commerce application, and for that we have controllers like orders, products, payments, etc. Anything related to e-commerce, okay? Then inside the controllers we have these get orders, post orders, various methods, right? Now the question is how it will be decided which kind of request will go to which controller method. For that, we have a routing like this after the middleware. Now listen carefully. What routing will do, in the case of a URL with orders, the routing will redirect it to the order controller. And if the method in the request is get, then it will execute the get orders method of the orders controller only. So in the case of products or payments in the URL, the request will be redirected to the products or payments controller. And finally, the response will be sent back to the front end. Okay, so that is the role of routing. Here is the simplest and the easy to remember definition. Routing in Express is the process of directing incoming HTTP request to the appropriate handler functions based on the request method and the URL path. So this request method and URL path are the part of the request only. Great. In upcoming questions, we will explore more and more about routing, okay? So get ready for the fantastic journey. What is the difference between middleware and routing in Express? Sometimes we get confused by these two things, but now let's make it very clear. First difference is middleware is a function, whereas routing is a process. Okay, very simple. Second difference is, and you already know, middleware functions can access the request and response object, and then they can like either perform some action like authorization, logging, and then after that either they can end the request response cycle also, or middleware can also call the next middleware function. Okay, so that is about middleware. So in short, basically middleware will perform some logic. Okay, whereas routing is the process of directing incoming HTTP request to the appropriate handler, get, post, put, delete. Okay, so that means routing only directs the request. Routing does not perform any logic or on request. Okay, so that's the difference. How to implement routing? How do you define routes in Express? The answer is hidden in the question itself. We can implement routing by defining the routes in your application. That is the answer. Let me explain with the help of the codes. First, how to define the routes. First, like this, we can create an instance of the Express application. Then we can define a route for handling the GET request from the client. Okay. Here we will use the app.method name. Method can be get, post, put, delete. I am calling it journal method. Okay. So this is simply how we define the route. Nothing special. Now for it means now for every get request, this inside code will be executed. Okay. But in real applications, we redirect it to the controllers that I will show in upcoming question. For now, you can see this method will accept two parameters. First is the route path, and in this case it is slash, it means it's the route path. Okay, route. The second is the callback function. Now suppose the request is just www.example.com with the get method in the request. Okay, URL and the method is there. Then this defined route will be executed with the second argument callback function. Okay, and here is the second function we also called this second function, or we also called route handler. Similarly, we can define the routes for other methods like post, put, delete, and if the URL is .com/login, that means this defined route will execute only when the URL will have this login in the URL. Okay, and the post method, the request method is the post only. For that only this will execute. Great. This is how we can define the routes to implement a simple routing. Finally, we can start the server, open the browser. You can see here for the root URL, we are getting the get method request response. As I said in real application, we do not send the response like this. We will first redirect the request to the controller method, and then the response will come. That I will show in upcoming question. But now you know how to define the routes, and here I have also written the same thing which I already explained. It can help you in the last minute revision just before the interviews. Okay, how to handle routing in Express real applications. Yes, in real applications routing approach is slightly different. There are basically 5 steps. First step is to import the Express application. Second, define and execute our middleware for authentication, logging, etc. multiple purposes. Third, we import the controllers that we have in our application like this. Okay, we will use routing to redirect to these controllers based on the incoming URL and request URL and the request methods only. Okay, so fourth step is to define the routes like this. Here you can see that based on the URL only, a request will be redirect to this get order by ID functions of order controller. Okay, and the same thing will happen for the next 2 routes also. And fifth step is just to start the server like this as usual, and your routing is ready. So this is an idea and a basic understanding of how we can handle the routings in real applications. Okay, and the same steps I have written here for later reference. What are route handlers? I'm sure you already know the answer, but I'm covering it separately so that you do not miss anything while revising. Okay, small things matters. So we already aware about this code for defining the routes for handling get request, right? Now listen carefully. Here the second argument, which is a callback function, is the route handler only. Very simple answer. And you already know that this route handler function is used to process the request and generate the response. Okay, whole logic can be written here. The same thing I have written here also for your later revision. Okay, what are route parameters in Express? Again, a very short and simple question. Here is the code. Here we have defined the route with a route parameter. This user ID is the route parameter. So basically it's a dynamic value that the user can send with the request URL. Okay, and then you can access this route parameter by using this request.params object. Clear? Then we can use this user ID as per our application need. Great, that is the whole and short idea of the route parameter. Same thing is written here for the later reference.